Since this is a 1980s movie about frat brothers, there has to be a scene about dudes getting it on with an animal. I don't know how we're gonna be able to release this on YouTube. Oh my God. Welcome back to Laws Broken, the series where a real lawyer pulverizes your pleasant movies from the 1980s by showing you how illegal everything is, because everything is illegal. I'm sure most of you have probably watched Revenge of the Nerds at one time or another. Well, specifically, you probably watched it at 3 o'clock in the morning on TBS, since that's the only time slot where 80s frat boy comedies were allowed to air, albeit in highly edited form. And you might not remember all of the laws that were broken in Revenge of the Nerds, but I assure you, there were a lot of them, because the main fixation of these type of movies is, of course, girls.
There's 6,127 students at Adams, 58% of which are girls. So that's 7,107.32 boobs.
And thankfully, we've come a long time since this movie was released. Yes, Revenge of the Nerds is from another era, before nerds were celebrated, part of the zeitgeist, and they had their own award-winning TV shows.
Sarcasm? You think?
But in 1984, people were not so sensitive to the plight of the nerds. Hence, we got Revenge of the Nerds, a movie about a group of criminal degenerates and their plea for tolerance. So the criming kicks off with what may be an actual murder. As Lewis and Gilbert, the lead nerds, walk through their Adams College for the first time, they walk right by the Alpha Beta fraternity. This sets up what is probably the most quoted line from the movie. Yes, Ogre takes one look at the pair of computer junkies and lets out a primal roar, as one does. This sets Lewis and Gilbert on edge as they realize that they are subjects of intense derision. What they don't seem to notice is that Ogre is dangling a man from the roof, and that man then presumably drops 30 or more feet to the ground. Did he die? Did he just break his neck? Did we just watch a murder take place in the first 5 minutes of this movie? Well, the movie takes place at Adams College, a fictional college somewhere in the Midwest. Since I've never picked on Nebraska before, let's pick on Nebraska. I'm setting the movie smack dab in the middle of the Cornhusker State. And in Nebraska, a person commits murder in the first degree if he or she kills another person, 1, purposefully and with deliberate and premeditated murder, or 2, in the perpetration or the attempt to perpetrate any other first degree felony. I'm gonna go out on a limb and say that there just aren't many circumstances that justify intentionally dangling a person off of a roof. First degree murder carries a potential life sentence if the person dies, but if there's just an attempt, then it's a class 2 felony which carries a penalty of up to 50 years in prison. I think Ogre's probably gonna get out in 25 with good behavior. Now, the plot, so to speak, really takes off when the Alphas accidentally burn down their fraternity house. In their defense, who knew that playing with a Zippo and drinking 180 proof whiskey could lead to an actual fire? So, is this arson? Well, probably not. A person only commits first degree arson if they intentionally set fire to a structure or start a fire while in the process of committing another felony. The fire starter here appears to be a guy named Haystack. I guess that explains this movie's choice to put him in overalls. But at any rate, he didn't intentionally set the fire. Accident is generally a defense to arson, but he might also be able to plead diminished capacity because of extreme intoxication. Now, intoxication is another version of a diminished capacity defense. Involuntary intoxication is when someone drugs you or you take something that you didn't expect to react to. But voluntary intoxication is when you really do mean to get drunk, and of course you succeed. Now, getting drunk on purpose is not a defense on its own, otherwise we'd all just get drunk and commit crimes without consequence. However, if you're so wasted that you can't control your actions, then it might mean that prosecutors would have a hard time proving that you set the fire intentionally. So based on these defenses, it might be that Haystack is safe from charges of first degree arson. But that doesn't mean that everyone is completely off the hook. The guys tell the fire department that the fire was caused by some faulty wiring. This is probably a misstep. It's definitely a crime to lie to law enforcement authorities. Nebraska law calls these false reporting. Quote, a person commits an offense of false reporting if he or she A, furnishes material information he or she knows to be false to any peace officer or other official with the intent to instigate an investigation of an alleged criminal matter or to impede the investigation of an actual criminal matter. This is a class 1 misdemeanor. Now, the Alpha Betas face up to 1 year in jail and or $1,000 fine for false reporting. But shout out to a young John Goodman as the football coach who helps the guys get alternative housing. And there is of course a big game coming up and he doesn't want them worrying about where they're going to live. The dean acquiesces to this plan, which then leads to the next scenes where the Alphas are storming the freshman dormitory and throwing everyone out.
So as of now, that dorm is ours, right? Yeah! Any room you want. Ready? Bang!
These guys are probably the same ones that 35 years later would storm the Capitol and basically do the same thing. Ogre then throws a man out the window. Now, just because the dean consented to the plan doesn't mean that the way that they moved into the dorms was legal. Throwing a guy out the window is still assault and battery, and more precisely, it's defenestration. Defenestration is one of my favorite words in the English language. It's the act of throwing someone out a window. Now, in the past, defenestration has ignited multiple wars, including the Bohemian Revolt against the Habsburg Emperor Ferdinand II, which started the 30 Years' War back in 1618. Now, here in America, defenestration is usually just considered aggravated battery. Charles Barkley once famously heaved a man through a glass window after the man harassed several people at a bar. Barkley said, "What he did was inappropriate. I'm going to defend myself. Let there be no debate. If you bother me, I'm going to whip your ass. The guy threw ice in my face and I slammed his ass into the window." Let it never be said that Charles Barkley doesn't have a way with words. Now, Barkley was charged with aggravated battery, but the case was dropped after the man who got thrown through the window declined to prosecute. That happened after he signed a settlement with Sir Charles. Now, in Nebraska, the state charges this as an assault crime. Quote, "A person commits the offense of assault in the first degree if he or she intentionally or knowingly causes serious bodily injury to another person." First degree assault is a Class 2 felony. Class 2 felonies carry possible punishment of up to 50 years in prison, but I think the outcome here depends a lot on whether the victim was seriously hurt or just banged up. Ogre probably got first degree assault, let's say 10 years. But let's focus now on the nerds. The nerds are now homeless and seeking a fraternity, so Betty Childs, the leader of the Mean Girls, intervenes to send them to the Alpha Betas, where they will be humiliated.
Well, tell us, what frat do you think is us?
You guys are alpha betas all the way.
Since this is a 1980s movie about frat brothers, there has to be a scene about dudes getting it on with an animal. Here is that scene.
"You guys seem pretty cool. Take these for later." Rubbers? What do we need rubbers for?
Okay, that is more than enough of that scene. We don't actually see Gilbert and Lewis fornicating with the sheep, but if they did, that is the crime of indecency with an animal. Quote, "A person commits indecency with an animal when such person subjects an animal to sexual penetration as defined in section 28-318. Lewis and Gilbert, therefore, indecency with an animal as a class 3 misdemeanor, get up to 3 months in jail and or a $500 fine. Now, in our next scene, it features multiple instances of the cinema sin of racial stereotyping, where a frat bro asks Takashi if he knows karate, and then he puts a jockstrap on his head.
You know karate?
No.
Good.
Now, under Nebraska law in 1984, this is simple assault at best. Misdemeanor assault is assault in the third degree and consists of either intentionally, knowingly, or recklessly causing bodily injury to another person or threatening another in a menacing manner. Now, Takashi isn't seriously hurt, so this isn't a felony case. But 21st century bullies beware, because in 1997, Nebraska passed a hate crimes law that enhances criminal penalties when a person commits an offense because of someone's race, color, religion, ancestry, national origin, gender, sexual orientation, age, or disability. If found guilty of a hate crime under the law, it acts as a penalty enhancement. This means that a person will be punished for the next level of offense. So if you were to use a racial slur or ask a guy if he knows karate before choking him with his own jockstrap, expect prosecutors to consider a penalty enhancement. So, random frat guy, the penalty in this case would be up to 6 months in jail, a fine of up to $1,000 or both. Luckily for this guy, cancel culture hasn't arrived in 1984, so this guy can probably just get off with probation. Now, in the next scene, Lewis inadvertently invents apartments.com, Zillow, and Airbnb.
Okay, I programmed him with all the rental units in the area.
And the computer he built looks totally like it's related to the dogs. You don't see it? Well, just wait until you see it in action later on. Now, Lewis's Zillow moment brings us to this scene where Wormser, the 13-year-old, goes to one of the apartments and is hit on by an adult woman.
Hi, I came about the room for rent.
It's right next to mine. It'll be perfect for us.
Why, yes, she did answer the door wearing a negligee, and she immediately offers the boy sex, things that would only happen in a 1980s frat movie. Now, this is probably criminal child enticement. Quote, "No person by any means and without privilege to do so shall solicit, coax, entice, or lure or attempt to solicit, coax, entice, or lure any child under the age of 14 years into any place with the intent to seclude the child from his or her parent, guardian, or other legal custodian, or the general public, whether or not the person knows the age of the child." The prospective landlady arguably tried to entice Wormser into the house in violation of the law. She's guilty of a Class 3A felony. Class 3A felonies carry a possible punishment of up to 3 years in prison and an 18-month post-release supervision and/or up to a $10,000 fine. And is it also contributing to the delinquency of a child? Well, under Section 28-709 of the Nebraska Criminal Code, any person who by any act encourages, causes, or contributes to the delinquency or need for special supervision of a child under 18 years of age, so the child becomes or will tend to become a delinquent child, or a child in need of special supervision commits contributing to the delinquency of a child. Now, there's a lot of gray area about what it means for a child to, quote, tend to become delinquent. Wormser isn't a child in need of special supervision. In fact, he's actually a genius. But the statute doesn't require that the child actually become delinquent or need special supervision, but only that the defendant encourage the child to become delinquent or to need special supervision so that the child will, quote, tend to become a delinquent child or a child in need of special supervision. So let's say this landlady is getting slapped with 6 months in jail for her tendency to create a delinquent child. And then, of course, the computer that he created basically goes off and becomes a Dalek, even attacking a human being. Now, when the newly minted Tri-Lambs plan a party, they struggle to get dates. And this is where the movie takes a turn from Revenge of the Nerds into Revenge of the Incels. Of course, Booger has been searching for dates at the local high school.
Have any of you guys got dates besides Gilbert?
I do. Yeah, but that's with a guy.
What about you, Booger?
I've been out combing the high schools all day.
And although we don't see his conduct, if we take him at his word, he's potentially broken several laws. First is stalking, which is defined as being willfully harassed, intentionally terrified, threatened, or intimidated by individuals who intentionally follow, detain, stalk, or harass them. Harassing behavior occurs when someone engages in conduct that, quote, seriously terrifies, threatens, or intimidates the person, and which serves no legitimate purpose. This is a Class 1 misdemeanor, unless the victim is under 16 years old, when it becomes a felony. So Booger is almost certainly facing up to a year in jail and/or a $1,000 fine just for stalking these teen girls. Now, after the frat boys and girls continue to mock the nerds formulate a plan. For revenge, the nerds decide not to commit violence against the alphas because that would only bring them down to their level. So instead, they decide to commit violence against the women.
I know what we're gonna do.
Or in this movie's parlance, they decide to have a fun panty raid. These are the protagonists of this movie, remember. So let me give you a rundown of all the crimes in this particular scene. First, there's burglary. Person commits burglary if such person willfully, maliciously, or forcibly breaks and enters any real estate or any improvements erected thereon with the intent to commit any felony. The men broke in with the intent of chasing down naked women and planting video cameras on the premises. I think that probably qualifies as having the intent to commit a felony. Now, in Nebraska, burglary can be charged as either a Class 2 or Class 3 felony depending on the circumstances of the case. A Class 2 felony in Nebraska is punishable by up to 50 years in prison, while a Class 3 felony is punishable by up to 4 years in prison. So let's pretty much just throw the book at Lewis and give him 50 years in prison for committing burglary in order to commit a whole bunch of sex crimes. Then, of course, there is the guilt of first-degree criminal trespass. A person commits first-degree criminal trespass if he or she, quote, enters or secretly remains in any building or occupied structure or any separately secured or occupied portion thereof, knowing that he or she is not licensed or privileged to do so. This is a first-degree misdemeanor that probably will not carry more than 3 to 6 months in jail. And then here's Lewis, terrifyingly just hiding in the shower, then jumping out yelling panty raid, and then chasing the naked girls down the hall.
Panty raid!
Today, this would have ended with Olivia Benson taking the perp to jail, but in 1984, it was played for laughs. But Lewis may be guilty of second or third degree sexual assault. Quote, any person who subjects another to sexual contact without consent of the victim is guilty of sexual assault in either the second or third degree. And what is sexual contact, you probably didn't ask? Well, that is defined as, quote, the intentional touching of the victim's sexual or intimate parts, or the intentional touching of the victim's clothing covering the immediate area of the victim's sexual or intimate parts. Now, unfortunately for the victims here, sexual assault is only a Class 1 misdemeanor if the perpetrator didn't cause serious personal injury. Now, did Lewis touch any of these women? We don't know, but clearly he was attempting to do that. Third degree sexual assault is a Class 1 misdemeanor which carries a possible penalty up to 1 year in jail and a fine of $1,000. And while the girls scream, the nerds congratulate themselves on their crimes. The nerds then install video cameras in the sorority house and then do terrible things with that tape. This is behavior that nowadays would have gotten them labeled as sex offenders for life, but it's definitely an invasion of privacy. So what laws did they break in addition to breaking and entering, sexual assault, and trespass? Well, under Nebraska Criminal Section 28-311, quote, "It shall be unlawful for any person to knowingly intrude upon any other person without his or her consent in a place of solitude or seclusion." Now that's a misdemeanor, but they also violated Section 2, which states, "It shall be unlawful for any person to knowingly and intentionally photograph, film, or otherwise record an image or video of an intimate area of another person without his or her knowledge and consent." This is a Class 4 felony. The maximum penalty is 2 years imprisonment and 2 months post-release supervision and a $10,000 fine, or both. So all of them, including the 13-year-old Wormser, are looking at a 2-year prison sentence for unlawful intrusion. And of course, later they violate Section 3 of that criminal code by selling photographs of naked women. Quote, "It shall be unlawful for any person to knowingly and intentionally distribute or otherwise make public an image or video of another person recorded in violation of Section 2 of this section without that person's consent." This is a Class 2A felony with a 20-year maximum prison sentence. And when this movie was released, there was no sex offender registry, but today, if the men were over 19 and any victim was under the age of 18, they'd be required to register under the Sex Offender Registration Act. And they also allowed the 13-year-old Wormser to watch these videos, which probably contributed to the endangerment of a minor. And please note that the girls were fighting off the nerds, and this is mostly in self-defense. Under today's laws, under most states these days, they probably would have been justified in just shooting these guys dead for home invasion. And then finally, capping off the biggest crimes, we have that time that Lewis Betty. Yeah, you heard me. Lewis puts on a Darth Vader mask, impersonates Stan, and has sex with Stan's girlfriend, Betty. Now, sex through deception is but is not always punishable as a crime depending on how the jurisdiction defines consent. By fraud was first recognized in American criminal law in 1865 in Michigan in the People versus Crosswell. There, the Michigan Supreme Court upheld the defendant's conviction for by fraud and stated, quote, "The outrage upon the woman is just as great in these cases as if actual force had been employed." That's because the women didn't consent to sex with that particular man, which is the same situation we have here. And of course, there are always going to be people defending this scene by alleging that in 1984, no one knew it was wrong. But that's kind of like saying that in the 18th century, no one knew that slavery was wrong. Definitely people knew. In fact, it was a crime back then, so it's hard to say that everything was hunky-dory back then. And here, to add insult to injury, Betty is actually happy with the deception and leaves Stan for Lewis.
It was wonderful. You did things to me you've never done before.
And critics at the time didn't even seem to be bothered by this. Gene Siskel loved it. He called the characterization of the two sweet. And although Roger Ebert listed the panty raid scene as one part of the movie that could put the boys in a bad light, he called the movie great because of the human element.
There's a human element underlying this film that makes it interesting, the story of these nerds.
I don't know how we're going to be able to release this on YouTube. Oh my God. And here's a quick rundown of the minor laws broken in this movie. The football team assaults Gilbert. The coach participates, even threatening to break his neck, attempted assault. Here the frat guys moon the tri-lambs. This is public indecency. The person commits public indecency if such person exposes, quote, "the genitals of the body done with the intent to affront or alarm any person." It's a class 2 misdemeanor, and that would get these guys up to 6 months in jail and a fine. The frat bros and frat girls steal a farm truck and then turn the pigs loose on the nerd's house. That's simple theft and vandalism, punishable by up to a year in jail. The jocks placed a burning nerd sign in front of the lawn, vandalism, 3 to 6 months in jail. The nerds drip some heat rub oil on the alpha's jockstraps. Is that a crime? You bet it is. That's assault. And let's talk about the prison sentences for the two worst characters in this movie. It was written with only one main bad guy, Ogre, but Lewis is also just as bad, if not worse. Ogre probably gets 25 years in jail for attempted murder and 15 for defenestration. That's 40 years in jail. And the ultimate perp of this movie, Lewis, will probably go to prison for by deception, let's say 20 years for that. He's also guilty of 2 counts of unlawful intrusion for entering and helping with filming, which is 4 more years. Add to that 50 years for burglary, 1 year for assaulting the girls in the hallway. His total sentence is probably somewhere around 60 to 75 years. Now, this video isn't over. As you can imagine, there are a lot more crimes that the nerds committed, but it's too hot/disgusting to go on YouTube. But you can watch the extended version over on Nebula. And I'm thrilled to announce my first Nebula original, Bad Law Words Good. It's a long-form documentary where I explore all the most common legal and linguistic ideas that people throw around in everyday life incorrectly. So strap in, because it's gonna get really pedantic. It's a hilarious romp through legal misunderstandings, logical fallacies, and Law and Order parodies. And it's only available on Nebula. Because Nebula is a place where we can experiment with content and do things that we couldn't put on YouTube. And we're thrilled to be partnering with CuriosityStream because they are the go-to source for the best documentaries and long-form educational content on the internet. They even have an entire section devoted to unsolved mysteries and crime. So if you like my videos, you will love the stuff on CuriosityStream. And we've worked out a deal where if you sign up for CuriosityStream with the link in the description, you'll also get a Nebula subscription for free. And to be clear, that Nebula subscription is not a trial. It's free for as long as you're a CuriosityStream member. And right now, CuriosityStream is offering 26% off their annual plans. That's less than $15 for the entire year for both CuriosityStream and Nebula. So if you click on the link that's on screen right now, you'll get CuriosityStream and Nebula for 26% off. Or you can go to curiositystream.com/LegalEagle. It's a great way to support this channel and educational content directly for under $15 per year. So if you want a huge discount on CuriosityStream and Nebula, just click on the link that's on screen right now or the link that's in the description. Plus, clicking on that link really helps out this channel. And while you're there, click on this playlist with all of my other laws broken and legal reactions, so click on this playlist or I'll see you in court.